It's April of 2010, and in St. Paul, Minnesota, a desperate 911 call comes in from Heidi Firkus, who tells the dispatcher that someone is breaking into her house. Within seconds, a shot rings out, and Heidi is later pronounced dead, leaving behind her devastated husband, Nick. Except Nick knows much more about Heidi's murder than he's saying. Hello and welcome to The Dark Side of Love. I'm your host, Bianca Sloan, author of suspense novels about the dark side of love. And this week I'm putting a spotlight on the case I'm calling The Wrong Husband. Heidi Marie Erickson was born in 1984 in Minnesota, the youngest of John and Linda Erickson's 3 children, which included Heidi's older brothers, Peter and Henry. Heidi, with her brown hair and sparkling smile, was known to be funny, outgoing, a little quirky, outdoorsy, a lover of rom-coms, and someone who was always secure and confident. As her friend Krista Gibbs told the Twin Cities Pioneer Press about Heidi, quote, "She was always one who seemed to know what she wanted, and she was very certain about her decisions." Jessie Bain, Heidi's friend from the time they were on the basketball team together in elementary school, told the Pioneer Press, quote, "She, meaning Heidi, just was unapologetically excited and loved life. She loved God and her friends and her family, and she saw the best in people." Faith also played a big role in Heidi's life, with the Erickson family being regular and devoted members of the congregation at Calvary Baptist Church in Roseville. Heidi served as a youth group leader and regularly volunteered at the Sunday school. And it was at church that Heidi met her future husband, Nick Firkus. Nick's family owned a successful home contracting business, and like Heidi, Faith was very much at the center of Nick's life. He was also a youth group leader, and as fellow Calvary member and Heidi's mentor at the church, Marcus Sarrazin told 48 Hours, Nick, quote, "had a very warm and engaging personality, always smiling. He carried himself with confidence, and he had high character, high integrity in the church. That was the reputation he built for himself." Heidi graduated from Roseville Area High School in 2003 and went on to enroll at the University of Northwestern in St. Paul, where she studied graphic design and Bible theology. She had also started dating Nick, and the couple got serious pretty quickly. And as Heidi's friend Krista told the Pioneer Press, she knew she wanted to spend the rest of her life with him, telling Krista, quote, "I think he's the one." Indeed he was, because Heidi and Nick got married in 2005 at Calvary Church where they met. Nick was 22, Heidi 20. Nick went on to work as the director of operations for the carpet cleaning division of his family's home contracting business, while Heidi took a position with the same financial services firm where her father worked. Then in 2007, the couple bought their first house in what was considered an up-and-coming neighborhood in St. Paul, Minnesota, but one that in general was considered to be pretty quiet. Heidi and Nick seemed to be enjoying life and each other, throwing dinner parties with their friends at the St. Paul house and an annual fondue party, which friends think was a play on booyah. However, according to the Pioneer Press, Heidi had mentioned to her mom that she and Nick were looking at moving into an apartment in Minneapolis, so they could save for a bigger house and eventually start a family. According to her mother, Heidi didn't seem to be in any hurry to move, but that it was something that was definitely on the horizon. Heidi and Nick started 2010 with a trip to Hawaii in February, and that April, the couple installed a badminton set in their backyard and had even bought new sleeping bags in anticipation of summer camping trips. April 24th, 2010. It's Sunday. Heidi goes shopping at the Mall of Americas with a girlfriend to buy a dress for a friend's wedding, and when she got home around 6 o'clock, she and Nick ordered in burgers from a local restaurant for dinner before they settled in to watch Avatar. They went to bed that night between 11 and midnight. Around 6 a.m., Nick got up for a glass of water from the bathroom when he hears a noise downstairs, as though someone is trying to break in, like fiddling with the doorknob and then rattling as though they were trying to bust the door open. Nick wakes Heidi up and tells her that someone is trying to get into the house. He grabs his shotgun from their closet and loads it with 2 shells before he rushes Heidi down the stairs, who by now is calling 911 on her cell phone. Nick says they were making a run toward the garage in their car so that they could get away, which he says is the plan that they always had in the event that their house was ever broken into. Heidi is in front of Nick on the stairs, and as they pass the front door, it bursts open, and suddenly the intruder is standing in their entryway. Heidi runs toward the kitchen and the back door, while Nick and the intruder engage in a life and death struggle. Nick says they're battling for control of the shotgun, and that during the skirmish, the intruder shoves the gun against Nick's chest, that his finger slips on the trigger, meaning Nick, and that the gun goes off. Nick says that he knows the bullet hit Heidi in the back because, again, she's running for the back door. So she's facing away from the fight that's going on. Nick says that the gun goes off again, and this time it hits him in the leg. Nick is able to call 911, and paramedics rush to the scene, transporting Nick and Heidi to the hospital. Nick survives. Heidi does not. Heidi Firkus was 25 years old. Nick leaves the hospital on crutches to head to the police station so that he can be questioned about what happened. And as Sergeant Jim Gray of the St. Paul Police Department tells 48 Hours, there is a lot about Nick's story that just does not add up. So for one, it's weird that someone is breaking in at 6:30 on a Monday morning, because most burglaries happen between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., when nobody's home. And why did Nick, who, remember, has the shotgun, make Heidi run down the stairs in front of him? Why did he not insist, that she stay behind him, the guy with the gun, as they're making a run for it? Why is he putting her in the literal line of fire? Which brings me to my third point that makes me go, why didn't they stay upstairs? Hide in the bathroom, which probably has a lock on it, while they call 911. And then Nick is shot in the leg, and his wound, it's a flesh wound, while Heidi was shot in the back. How is it that she is fatally shot and he's just grazed by this bullet? And finally, when Nick is being questioned by Sergeant Gray, it takes him an hour and 40 minutes, 1 hour and 40 minutes, before he asks what happened to Heidi by saying, quote, "Well, I just want to know the final answer on Heidi." And when Sergeant Gray tells Nick that his wife didn't make it, his response, quote, "I figured that. I figured that." Who says that? That's like you go into 7-Eleven at closing time and they tell you that the Slurpee machine's not working. You say, I figured that. I thought I'd take a chance. You have just been in this life and death battle with this intruder. You've been shot. Your wife is shot. She dies. And your response is, I figured that. Yeah, nobody can make that make sense. As Sergeant Nicole Sipes, one of the investigators on the case, told 48 Hours about this thoroughly fakakta answer, quote, "This was just another day. This was something he had to get through." So back to Sergeant Gray and Nick. So during their time together, Sergeant Gray asks Nick about his and Heidi's marriage, and Nick drops a little bombshell on the proceedings by saying that the couple were having some financial difficulties and that, in fact, they were planning to move the next day because the house was being foreclosed on and they were being evicted. Well, the evidence at the house just does not support this. There aren't any moving boxes to be found. The fridge is full of food. Heidi had a badminton set installed in the backyard. Does that sound like somebody who's getting ready to move the next day? Heidi's friends say that she was a planner and that if she and Nick were moving the next day, she would have had everything ready to go. She would have taken the day off of work, be boxes everywhere. I doubt, very seriously doubt, she would be leisurely shopping with her girlfriend or watching a movie with Nick, both of which she did less than 24 hours before she was murdered. And not only is there no evidence whatsoever that the couple were about to move, there's just not a lot of evidence that Nick was in this ferocious brawl with this intruder. Now, it did look as though there was some evidence of someone using something to separate the door from the frame, like, they put like a screwdriver or something in there to try to separate the two, but there are no footprints on the door from where somebody tried to kick it in. And it's a wood door. It doesn't look like anybody tried to ram their shoulder through it. There's nothing. There's nothing that really says this violent intruder coming in to do harm actually tried to get in. Also, one other really important thing. Inside the house, there's a table right next to the front door, and there's like some knickknacks and other things on it, and that is completely undisturbed. And they had a very short, it wasn't even really an entryway. Like literally, you just open the door and like you're in the house. There would be no way if you were jawing with somebody back and forth, there'd be no way that you would not knock against that table, knock against that stuff. And everything is completely intact. And in fact, pretty much everything in the house is quite neat, quite organized. Uh, they're not moving. They aren't going anywhere. So nothing that Nick is saying makes any sense. So his family, Nick's family, they hire a prominent defense attorney. And of course, one of the first things that he tells Nick is to zip it. He also instructs Nick that instead of using the sketch artist that the police have on staff, he says, we're going to hire our own, which, why? Oh, right. Because probably you're hiding something. At any rate, 2 weeks after the murder, the sketch that Nick comes up with describes a black man in a hoodie, late 30s, early 40s, as the culprit, who broke into the house and was responsible for Heidi's death. Police released the sketch to the media, but it does not yield any tips, useful or otherwise, so ultimately, it's a dead end. The truth is, even though cops are convinced, absolutely convinced, that Nick is the guy, they just can't prove it. So, Heidi's murder goes unsolved. Not long after Heidi's murder, Nick moves out of the house they shared in St. Paul and moves in with his brother Hugo. And about 2 months after the murder, he strikes up a friendship with the sister of one of Heidi's best friends, a woman by the name of Rachel Sanchez, who was going through her own hard time having just moved to the area as she was in the midst of a divorce. Rachel told 48 Hours that her impression was that, quote, Nick seemed to be handling things well. It felt like he was very grounded, and his steadiness was an attractive quality. Like Heidi, Rachel says she and Nick bonded over their faith, telling 48 Hours, quote, at the time, God played a big part in my life. And I think that's another quality that I saw in him, that he loved God like I did. Rachel and Nick begin dating in earnest in the spring of 2011, and a year later, Nick proposes and they get married. They very quickly had 3 kids, and the couple had decided that Rachel would be a stay-at-home mom while Nick would be the breadwinner and be the one to handle the family finances. Rachel told the Pioneer Press that while she was aware of Nick's past money problems, he had told her, quote, it wasn't that bad. She chalked it up to him being young and inexperienced with managing money, and that she thought, quote, he proved that he can do this and take care of it. I wanted to give him a chance to do that. So even though Rachel trusted her husband to handle their finances, as she told the Pioneer Press, that trust began to slowly erode. For example, she would find food wrappers from fast food places in his car, which meant that he was eating out a lot, which cut into the family grocery budget, with Rachel noting to the paper that at times the family lived paycheck to paycheck. Remember, they've got 3 kids. That's a lot of mouths. Then the collection calls about unpaid medical bills start. Nick would put Rachel off, telling her, quote, somebody messed up, or I tried to call but they didn't call back, insisting that he would take care of it. Then came the day in 2018 when Rachel found a bill in Nick's sock drawer about unpaid property taxes on their house and that they were in danger of foreclosure. As the Pioneer Press reported, Nick's parents had twice before given the couple money in 2016 to pay the taxes, but instead of paying them, Nick kept the money instead. All of this is just a bridge too far for Rachel. Nick had never really talked about Heidi during his marriage to Rachel, had never checked in with the police regarding the status of the investigation, and never really seemed to show any emotion about it. Rachel assumed it was because his lawyer had instructed him to keep quiet, and she probably also thought it was the grief of what had happened that held him back from talking about it. Now, though, her instincts are screaming at her that something is wrong, and she's afraid of what he'll do if she confronts him about what she's found, realizing that maybe this is what happened with Heidi. And as she told the Pioneer Press, quote, I didn't know how desperate he would feel. I just wasn't sure, and I wasn't willing to risk the safety of my kids to find out. So one night, she wakes up her kids, puts them in their car seats, and she takes off, all while Nick is sleeping. Meanwhile, the investigation into Heidi's death has been revitalized. So in 2015, there is a new investigator, Sergeant Jake Peterson, who has taken over the case, and he decides to re-release the sketch that Nick had provided back in 2010 to the media. Nothing had come of it before, but with absolutely nothing else to go on, Sergeant Peterson figures, why not? Can't hurt. Turns out to be a momentous decision because a really good tip comes in and it changes everything. A woman calls in and says, I know him. I know this guy. I know who's in that sketch. So cops, of course, are excited because, hey, now we can finally get justice for Heidi. So the man in the sketch is Michael Lee Pye. And when cops run his name through their database, they discover that Mr. Pye is quite familiar to them. Because back in 2010, police had investigated him in connection with a series of home invasions that were similar to what Nick says happened to him and Heidi, where someone broke into the house early in the morning while the homeowners were at home. So on the surface, this seems like a slam dunk. The puzzle pieces are finally falling into place, and again, we can get justice for Heidi. Except, Michael Lee Pye was arrested on New Year's Day, January 1st of 2010 for those home invasions. Heidi was murdered on April 25th of 2010. 4 months, almost 5 months after Michael Pye was arrested. So unless he conquered the time-space continuum or managed to clone himself somehow, no way in the world is he responsible for Heidi's murder. Michael Pye is not the guy. So during those home invasions, Michael Pye's face is plastered across the local news, meaning you'd pretty much have to be living under a rock to miss it. And it's looking like Nick Firkus was paying mighty close attention because it seems as though, on the surface, right, that he tried to pin Heidi's murder on Michael Pye by coming up with a sketch that looked like this guy. But apparently he wasn't paying close enough attention because he missed the part where the guy was arrested. So Sergeant Nicole Sipes, who has been newly assigned to the case, she begins to do a really deep dive into Nick and Heidi's marriage, including Nick's assertion that he and Heidi were in the process of moving because they were being evicted, which, as I said earlier, turns out, it's totally bogus. They weren't moving. So Sergeant Sipes also holds up a magnifying glass to Nick and Heidi's financial troubles, believing that they hold the key to what happened. Her investigation revealed that buying the house is really what put the couple underwater. Like, they really weren't ready to buy a house, it sounds like. And Nick had not paid the mortgage in close to 2 years. And as a result of the foreclosure, their home insurance was canceled. So their insurance agent, Kurt Brown, who is a longtime friend of Heidi's family, he got that notification and he calls the couple and he gets Nick because he wants to find out, well, hey, what's going on? What's happening? And according to the Pioneer Press, Nick told Kurt, quote, a teller or somebody had been stealing his paychecks and he was working to resolve that issue with the bank. I'm sorry. 2010, direct deposit, a thing. That just doesn't make any sense. Sorry. Kurt went on to say, quote, I remember thinking I've been around this business long enough to know that you don't go into foreclosure because a teller steals your paycheck. The paper also reported that in March of 2010, a little over a year before she was murdered, Heidi got a call regarding an unpaid medical bill and she asked Nick to take care of it. In an email from Nick to Heidi, he said, quote, hey, got off the phone with U.S. Bank. They have flagged and sent our info to their auditing department to see where the discrepancies are. According to Sergeant Sipes, though, Heidi and Nick do not have an account with U.S. Bank. Now, the bank accounts that they do have are overdrawn. They owe over $17,000 on one credit card. The insurance policies on their cars have been canceled. And the evidence shows that Nick had tried to stave off the looming eviction by telling the law firm that was handling the proceedings that his grandmother was dying, was in hospice, and he needed a few more weeks, which the law firm agreed to. Of note, neither Nick nor Heidi's grandmothers were in hospice or dying at that time. And the day before she died, Heidi told the girlfriend she went shopping with that she and Nick had been victims of identity theft to the tune of $180,000 to $200,000. But like everything else, this was also a lie. It is hard to discern just what Nick spent the money on, though they did go on a trip to Hawaii in February of that year that cost over $3,500. Now, Heidi told her mom that Nick got a bonus at work, which covered the cost of the trip. Not true, unless you count that Nick's dad paid for one of the plane tickets, and Nick does work for his dad, so I guess. Um, but during the interview that he had with Sergeant Gray, in those days after Heidi's murder, Nick made it seem like he and Heidi were coping with this mess the best that they could, saying, quote, "We're both kind of dealing with the shame of the whole thing." Except there is zero evidence that Heidi had any idea about what was going on. Heidi did not attend the eviction hearing. Her signature does not appear on any paperwork regarding the foreclosure or the eviction. And Heidi's friends and family say that she definitely would have reached out for help if she had known what was going on, but absolutely no one says she indicated in any way that she was worried about an imminent eviction. And in fact, Heidi sent an email to a girlfriend on March 11th, 2010 that said, quote, "Wish we weren't tied down to our house so we could move somewhere fun." Further emails showed that Heidi had repeatedly emailed Nick about setting up a meeting with the realtor who helped them buy their house to talk to the realtor about selling it. Nick lies again that he has set up a meeting with the realtor, but the realtor confirmed that not only had he not heard from Nick, no such meeting has been scheduled. Again, Heidi does not know that they are being evicted. I'm as certain of this as I am that the sun exists. As Sergeant Sipes told 48 Hours, Nick's ego and how he was perceived among his circle of friends and community may have been a motivating factor in his deception, saying, quote, "I believe he was concerned about the shame of what he had done, how it would look, and that he couldn't come clean with her. It had gotten too big at that point." She went on to say, quote, "He was described by his friends as being wise and being the person that they would go to for advice. It just became easier to see that this was someone who did not want his friends, his family, to know the extent to which he had failed." So the motives are becoming ever clearer, and the evidence continues to point to Nick as the murderer. He was ashamed that his web of lies was falling apart, and he staged this burglary to avoid having to come clean about just how deep he had plunged he and his wife into debt. But we feel bad for a widower, this victim of a violent crime. Nobody's going to give that guy a hard time. So in 2019, Nick's second wife, Rachel, had divorced him, but of course they had 3 kids, so they continued to talk. And Rachel had actually recorded a conversation with him on her phone where she expressed her lack of faith in his ability to tell the truth, and that because he could lie so easily about monumentally important things, the only conclusion she could come to, and this is where he cuts her off on the tape by asking her point blank, quote, "that I could murder my wife." Rachel admits that's exactly what she thinks, and frankly, from there, everything pretty much swirls down the drain. Rachel turned those conversations over to Sergeant Sipes, who shared them with prosecutors who said, "Enough is enough. Pick him up." And so, on May 19th, 2021, more than 11 years after Heidi's death, a SWAT team storms into Nick's house and arrests him. He is charged with second-degree murder and was later indicted by a grand jury on first- and second-degree murder charges. Nick posts a $1 million bond and remains free until his trial finally begins on January 27th, 2023. Nick's defense was that he had no reason to kill Heidi because he was trying to hide his financial issues from her, that she was well aware of the situation. As the Pioneer Press reports, even Nick's father, Stephen, was steadfast that Heidi knew what was going on, saying there was, quote, "proven documentation of Heidi having to sign documents saying she knows the foreclosure steps and the dates, and it was posted on the door with a date." Nick's attorneys do not produce this supposed evidence in court, and the tapes that Rachel made of her conversation with her husband tossed out. The case must count on the overwhelming evidence of Nick's lies, the forensic evidence from the crime scene, including that Nick shot himself in the thigh after confirming that Heidi was dead, because he had to make it look real. The trial lasts for 11 days, with the jury getting the case on February 10th, 2023. It takes them 5 hours to come back with a verdict of guilty of premeditated and intentional murder. Nick is sentenced to life in prison, no parole. To this day, he has never admitted any guilt. He is appealing his conviction. Nick's long time in coming conviction was a relief. And as Heidi's mentor Marcus Sarrazin told 48 Hours, quote, "Justice may have been slow, but fortunately, the jury got it right." Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of The Dark Side of Love. I am your host, Bianca Sloan, and show your love for The Dark Side of Love by visiting thedarksideoflove.com for show notes and transcripts. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter to be notified about new episodes. You can also find a link to my Patreon page where you can access bonus material and other fun stuff. Learn more about my suspense novels about the dark side of love by visiting biancasloan.com. Thanks for hanging out with me, and join me next time for another tale of love gone wrong. I'll see you on the dark side.